So last night, some breaking news happened in the NBA where KARL-ANTHONY Towns got traded to the New York Knicks for Dante DiVincenzo, Julius Randle, and some draft capital, which is being sent to Minnesota and Charlotte as well. Now, my first initial reaction was, okay, this is a bit surprising because when I look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, they just came off a Western Conference Finals appearance. Yes, they lost to Dallas in 5 games, but a lot of those games are really close. And you're thinking they get another year to gel, build chemistry. They drafted Rob Dillingham. You want to see what that looked like with this core of Cat, Anthony Edwards, and Rudy Gobert. But Minnesota said, we want flexibility because of Cat's contract, and we still have Naz Reid as our sixth man. When looking at the overall trade between Minnesota and New York, let's just talk about the Knicks. Now, they add more spacing with Cat. For Julius Randle, he's more of a bruiser. He can get into the paint. He can get to the mid-range, but his shooting from three isn't that good. He shot 31%, 34%, and 31% in the last 3 seasons. The last time he shot 40% was 4 seasons ago, so you have more spacing with Cat out there. You also add more depth at the center position with Cat. Now, Mitch Robinson is dealing with an injury. He won't be playing at the beginning of the season, so Cat will be holding the fort for now. Also, I think for New York, you got to target another big man to add more depth around this roster. They got to answer the question about their bench, maybe, because McBride, he's solid, but we'll see if he takes a leap. Dante is a huge loss. We can't just ignore that. He was phenomenal from 3. He shot over 40%. I think the Knicks are better equipped right now than Minnesota to contend. I don't think they're at the level of Boston quite yet, but they're moving in that direction. When you look at the Celtics, one of the things that I have concerns as a Boston fan is the future at the big man position because Horford is going to retire, in my opinion, after this season. Are they going to keep Kristaps because he has a history of injuries? We saw last year he was hurt in the playoffs and he wasn't really healthy during the NBA Finals. So is Boston going to re-sign him in 2 years? There's a lot of question marks there. So for the Knicks, this is a great opportunity to build chemistry, to get more experience with your core pieces of OG, Brunson, and now you add in Cat and Mikal Bridges. You build this core roster, and eventually you get yourself a championship. That's what New York is aiming for. When looking at the Minnesota Timberwolves and what they did here, I'm going to have a positive and a negative. I'm going to start with the negative at first. It doesn't make sense why Julius Randle is on this roster. He can't space the floor. He's not a good three-point shooter. You lose rim protection because remember, Cat and Rudy Gobert in the paint, teams had a hard time scoring in there. Now you open up the lane and you open up more opportunities for guys like Jokic, Giannis, Embiid, and other guys to get to the lane without a lot of resistance outside of Rudy Gobert. The other concern I have is how much playing time is Dante going to take away from Rob Dillingham? Because you have a redundancy at shooting guard. With Rob, he's more of a combo guard. Dante, a combo guard. And you look at the roster, you're going, okay, is Rob going to play with Dante and Nickeil Alexander-Walker? Like, what does that look like going forward for Minnesota? I think their bench will be much stronger, but I have a concern there. Now, is Minnesota going to move off Rob Dillingham to get a more experienced playmaker as a point guard? That makes sense. I just don't know the direction Minnesota is heading. Now, on the positive side is you're going to have more flexibility in the future because you have that top 13 protected pick for 2025. The next year's draft class is going to be really good. The key for Minnesota is they got to hit on this draft or these trades to upgrade this roster. Because right now, when I'm looking at the Western Conference, I'm looking at OKC and Dallas as the best teams in the West. Outside of that, I don't think anyone's touching them. But for Minnesota, if they want to be in that conversation, they got to be smart with their next set of moves because you moved off Cat, who's a really good offensive player. I know he has his moments in the playoffs, but they're going to miss him out there because Julius Randle can't space the floor. So if you look at this roster, you have to ask yourself, okay, what is our next move when it comes to point guard? Because Mike Conley is getting up there in age. They need another playmaker. They can't just rely on Ant to do everything for them. And if you're the front office of Minnesota, what is your next move here? Because you have to be very strategic with how you're going to upgrade this roster. You got to keep Anthony Edwards happy. Look, there's a lot of questions that you got to answer here because you just made the Western Conference Finals. The owners might be saying we don't want to pay Cat because we might hit that second apron. But if you're trying to contend, you got to pay top dollar if you're trying to win championships. And you've got a generational talent in Anthony Edwards. He's not going to stick around forever for a rebuild. So Minnesota needs to figure this out. Again, there are some positives with the flexibility, but you've got to make sure you stick that because if you make another trade that doesn't make sense or you draft a player that doesn't fit this roster, like a reliable playmaker at point guard, then what are we doing here? Now, the trade overall, I think long-term, this could work out really well for Minnesota. Short-term, it could work out really good for New York. But it's so critical for Minnesota to make the right moves. For the New York Knicks, how is Cat going to handle the expectations of bringing the Knicks a championship? he's going to be relied upon a lot. And the Knicks need to make sure they find another big man next to Mitchell Robinson and Cat. Do you keep Mitchell Robinson because he's had a lot of injury concerns? So there are some question marks about this trade long term for both teams, because if you're trying to win championships, we got to contend with the likes of OKC, Dallas, and Boston. To me, those are the three teams that are above and beyond everyone else in the NBA. Yeah, you can talk about your Milwaukee's, your Philadelphia 76ers, but those three teams are above everyone else, in my opinion. So for New York, what is the next play? And how do you handle Cat? Can Tibbs coach him better this time? How is New York going to handle that expectation? You look at Minnesota. What are you doing next? Because, look, I understand you're trying to create flexibility, but make sure you're moving in a direction where you're a contender. Because Minnesota just got to the Western Conference Finals. They had the number one defense. All they really had to upgrade was their point guard position. That's what I was seeing out there, because their offense got stagnant because they didn't have enough playmakers at point guard. So they got to figure this out. I think you might have given up on this core of Cat, Rudy Gobert, and Ant prematurely, but time will tell. So that's my only question for Minnesota is, did you give up prematurely on a team that was on the rise with Cat, Rudy, and Anthony Edwards? Do I think the Knicks and Timberwolves got better? Yes. Do I think they're going to win a championship anytime soon? No. I think the Knicks have opened up a window for 3 years. They can make another move and really solidify that spot. For Minnesota, they improved their bench with Dante DiVincenzo. He's on a team-friendly deal with Naz Reid off the bench and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So I do like their bench. But when it comes to Julius Randle, I think he's a bad fit, and they need to figure out what they're going to do next so they can solidify the roster and keep Anthony Edwards happy. Overall, I'm not mad to trade for New York, because you got to get better. For Minnesota, it's a little bit of a head scratcher, especially when you got so close to making the NBA Finals. And yes, you ran to Dallas. It was just a bad matchup. And also experience matters, and Kyrie and Luka have been in deep playoff runs before. So yeah, we'll see what happens going forward. Hope you guys enjoyed this video today. Love to hear your thoughts on this trade between the Knicks and the Timberwolves. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.